for founders a very important part, right? You cannot just have values and say, this is amazing. If my team behaves like this, there's no stress. No, you have to be really committing yourself to these values. And if you don't follow the values anymore, right, it really starts with the top level and also the commitment of the top level to really adhere to the values.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. Here's your host, Sylvan.
Frank, very well welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you very much.
You are an investor, board member, and serial founder, an impressive career that we will talk about in a second. Before we do so, I actually want to start with your personal background. You studied at the ETH from 93 until 99, and during your master's in 97, you then founded ETH Juniors, probably a well-known organization for many of our listeners. It's also still around. And I was just wondering, what was the purpose of ETH Juniors back then when you initially started it?
Mm-hmm. So we founded ETH Juniors because we realized there was no junior enterprise at ETH Zurich. Junior enterprise is like a junior consulting company, student run. So students go out and try to get projects in the industry, and then they either solve it themselves or they find a matching student who has the skill set to then solve these problems. And that existed at the HSG in St. Gallen. It existed at the university, but not at ETH.
So that
we
was
thought,
the gap to fill. Exactly.
We need to fill the gap, absolutely.
And what is the role that it plays today? Because, as I said, it's still around, it's still active.
It's crazy, huh? Yeah. So let me just say one thing. I had at the 25-year anniversary, I had a little speech. And what I outlined is, it's a company that changes every 12 months, the whole team. It has, so there's never going to be an exit. Once you have reached a qualification and you have a master's diploma or whatever, master's diploma from ETH, you have to leave.
Of course.
Right? So it's only student run. You have to get the projects. Once you have found the project, which is the complexity of the project is pretty high, then you still need to find the person who can actually solve that project. You don't have that skill set in the team yet. Yeah. So it's actually a completely crazy setup for a company. And I'm really, really happy that we have this company still alive now for in the 26th year, so to say. I just had a barbecue with them last Friday. So there's people now born in 97. So basically the year that ETH Juniors was founded was their birth year. But most of them are younger than ETH Juniors is now.
That's crazy, but also very impressive at the same time.
It's amazing. It's really funny. It's probably been the oddest founding of a company I ever did. Yeah. The setup is very, very unique. But I mean, I think now it's an important part in the student ecosystem. Students who want to be entrepreneurs can train it there, so to say. It's, I would say, a low-risk environment, right? It's a Verein. So in the end of the year, they don't make any profit. They have salaries, but they make 4 million revenue at the moment, right? It's a solid, mid-sized Swiss company.
Yeah. To pull that off, right, with this turnover every 12 months, that's actually a huge challenge because you have basically the whole team, as you described, leaving every 12 months. How did you manage that? Because you need to have a pretty good system or at least organizational structure in place to make that work. Yeah. Was there any key learning or aha moment where you said, hey, this is what really worked well for us?
Well, you would have to ask the actual the actual people at the moment there. I think what they're doing is so half of the team switches and then the other half, right? So every 6 months, 50% of the team leave. And I think they have Wikipedias and they're really good now at handing over the tasks because that's one of the main issues they really have to solve all the time.
So it's basically a combination of good documentation, but they also shadowing each other.
Exactly.
And that's how you train.
Yeah. So when you come in, you have a year just a member and then you get a position in the board.
And what I really love to talk to you about is you've seen the Swiss ecosystem evolve for 2 decades now. And there has been a lot of things that happened, a lot of things that changed. So was entrepreneurship back in the 90s, was that a dirty word in Switzerland?
Well, I would say entrepreneurs were seen as a bit crazy at that time. So I come from a family of engineers. My father is a mechanical engineer. Both of my grandfathers were engineers. One of them even became a professor in Aachen. And so it was clear that I would become an engineer, right? And then founding juniors, they were already like, well, okay, this is not really in the curriculum of an engineer. And then, of course, after I finished my studies, I directly founded TempoBrain. And yeah, the comments might have been a bit like, well, you know, now you invested so much time in becoming, in getting an ETH diploma. Why do you throw it all away and do something completely different?
Right.
So it was not, I don't think the ecosystem was around as it is now, right? The ecosystem of it wasn't cool to be an entrepreneur then, I think.
And with parents, that makes it especially more difficult, right? Now you have role models, you have success stories out there. But back then, when you made that decision to then start your own company, your parents were probably not that amused, I could imagine.
No, they were, I mean, they always said, you know, worst case, you can come back, live at the house again. Yeah. No, it was seen as a huge risk.
Of course.
Which I think it still is, right? Becoming an entrepreneur is still risky. These days, when you get external funding, you kind of shade that risk in a bit, but you still need cash to survive. And once you have used all the funding, then you're in trouble as well. Your
back is to the wall to a certain degree.
Exactly.
And in that regard, has your definition of entrepreneurship changed in any way over the years? You know, is it still sort of the same? Of course, the environment has changed, but entrepreneurship per se, what is that to you, and has that changed over the years?
I think entrepreneurship is kind of magic, because you have the process goes like this. You have an idea, you have a plan, and in the end, somebody is willing to give you money for that idea that you had and that you materialized. Yeah. And as I always, when I have had sales workshops or so, I always said this is a magic moment when somebody says, yes, I buy your product or I buy your service. These days, maybe more online than in person. But I still think making this happen, that you create something from nothing, is an amazing process, right?
Absolutely. It's also a very creative act at the same time, right?
Absolutely. You create something that hasn't been there and nobody thought of.
I love that.
It's really, at the heart, entrepreneurship is pure creativity.
So let's talk about your company, TempoBrain, that you started in 1998. It was basically your second company that you started.
Technically, yeah.
Technically. TempoBrain was an HR consultancy, and I wonder, what was the problem that you solved with TempoBrain?
So with juniors, I saw that the market is there, that students don't really know what to do during the study times. Some tech guys, of course, they do tech stuff, right? They go programming, but in general, students don't really know who to address in the bigger company if they want to work during the study time. At the same time, companies don't really know what to do with a CV that says third semester physics. What does this person know or doesn't know? Yeah. Once the person has a diploma or a master's, then they get it. It's like, okay, now we can qualify this person. Now it's clear what this person can do. And so at that time, when there were activities at ETH, you know, we had the typical HR companies making these ads with like the painter, and I was like, nobody's going to go paint if they're studying, right? So we thought this is an interesting area to really try to catch students for part-time jobs while they're studying.
And how do you then put that idea into practice? Because that's the creative act that you described before, right?
Well, we were very creative, I must say. So what we did is we made a campaign. We got a website called 40.ch, and we went to the students. We pretty much plastered all ETH and university with these papers and said, come to us. We pay you $40 an hour.
Oh, that's
because we were expecting all these experts to come in and say, yes, I can do this and this and this. The only problem we didn't see is that many of those guys either were busy with studying or already had a job. And so what we ended up with was many part-time students. I mean, let's say students who wanted to work part-time, students who weren't not studying technology, but maybe languages or history. And they had time. They were able to learn quickly, but they didn't have many technical skills. So we had to pivot a little bit, and we met the head of HR from Credit Suisse. And he said, the students, very nice, great model. So we have a problem in the call center in Horgen. Why don't you go there and solve it for me? We went there, and at that time, it was 99, 2000, phone banking was a big deal, right? So people would call the bank and ask them how much money was there on their account. And they were looking for many people. They didn't have enough agents. And so we went there, we developed a model. We said, we're going to recruit these people. We're going to train them. We produce a shift planning software, and we had team leaders on site. So the in-house outsourcing model was born.
Wow.
So it was like a stack up of different services on top of finding people. And for example, Crazy said we need always 20 people there. And we said, okay, we have a team of 50 that work part-time. There's always going to be 20 people there. It's not just always going to be the same people.
That's amazing.
So that was really, really creative.
Absolutely. And also the pivot sounds like it's a natural part of the creativity process, so to speak.
Absolutely. I mean, I always thought, in B2B, it's easier, right? Because in B2B, you have clients, you can talk to them. You can ask them, what is your problem? How can we solve it? How much budget you want to spend on this? And then you can start working towards a solution with them.
Exactly. And then you actually bootstrapped the company for 16 years, from 300 to 600 employees and also to 40 million in revenue. And I want to talk about some of the lessons learned along the way, because I think there are many gold nuggets hidden in that story. The first one is you brought Tempo Brain, you made it through 2 recessions while being bootstrapped. That's an incredible achievement, because you probably had your back to the wall multiple times during that time. So what is the secret of building such a resilient company?
So what I tried, so when you take a step back, right? So phone banking and all these inbound call centers, so to say, they're great if a company is growing, if the economy is good. And people have more money, they want to know how much money they have, they did trading over the phone and so on. So that's like for the upside. We also developed a similar model for sales. So we were helping companies in retail sales. And you push sales more when the numbers go down, right? So we tried to have 2 different areas of business that were a bit complementary, right? So when everything goes great, then you need more people on the call. When everything goes down, people are not going to call anymore, but you need more sales. So that was a bit the basic idea of it. But then, of course, you always need luck to survive these phases.
Timing, I guess, right? That is the most important part.
Yeah, timing can be brutal. And in 2003, to be honest, I was really close to being overdebted. I had to go to my father and ask him for some money. And at that time, he said, yeah, okay, this is my pension fund. I can lend you my pension money, so to say, but I would be very happy to get it back. And I needed it to pay the salaries, right? But I had some ideas how to get out of that hole. And we made it out of the hole. At that time, we were like, I think, $20,000 close to be overdebted. So it was really, really close call.
But to take your dad's pension fund money, put that in your business, and then knowing, hey, I have to make it back. That is an immense pressure, isn't it?
It makes it real, yeah. It makes it real. You don't sleep that well during that time. Or I didn't. But we made it back. I was able to give him the money back. I gave him some shares of the company. And I think it turned out very well for him.
Fair point. But in that moment, you didn't know that, right? You hoped for it, but nobody knew.
But I think that is, in my opinion, one of the key ingredients of entrepreneurship, right? You cannot give up. There's no option. Failure is not an option. And for me, in that moment, that became absolutely clear. Because in Switzerland, you're liable for your AHV debt, right? So pretty much it's grobfahrlässig. So if a company goes bust and you have AHV debt, you go to prison.
Of course.
Or have to pay a fine, whatever. I mean, it's really getting serious at that moment that you think, okay, the upside is it's creativity, it's amazing. The downside really is that you're full in. It's not a job that you can say, oh, it's Friday, 5 o'clock, I got to go, bye. It follows you all the time.
But if I listen to you, it sounds like you didn't really have a choice. There was only like the pressure you have to make this work, right? So you probably didn't have too much time to think, should I continue, should I not continue? There was only one way. You had to make it work and to go forward.
Well, at that time, of course, you always think you have to do that, right? Looking back, you can ramp down a company. You can say, okay, guys, it was a great ride. That's it now. Goodbye. But I didn't think like this.
Why not? If you look back, what do you think? Why was that not even an option you were thinking about?
Well, first of all, I had many employees, as you said, and you owe it to the employees, right?
Right.
In Switzerland, the advantage is even if you close down a company, nobody has to sleep under the bridge. We have a rather strong social system. But you owe it to the people, right? I always think this is when entrepreneurship became real for me for the first time. Because juniors, it was fun and they're all students. And as I said, if you don't make revenue, there's nothing to pay. And you say, well, too bad. But once you have started the company and you hire, so to say, a real employee, that is a person that is really giving the future in your hands.
Absolutely.
Might have to feed a family. And that is really a moment when you say, wow, so that salary has to go out next month. If we don't make a salary, that's too bad. But that person really needs needs a salary. And then, of course, it scales up because you then don't have one person. In the end, you have hundreds of people. You get used to that, right? You start with one, you get the responsibility, and then eventually it's like, okay, we need another team member. You add them on top of your payroll, but you really have to make that payroll every month.
Absolutely. And the team that you talk about here, it's in the end also the company culture that seems to be a very important part along the whole startup and company building, so to speak. So what role does that solid culture play at TempoBrain or in your ventures in general?
I think culture is the most important part of a company. I think a good company culture with corporate values, with the vision, with the mission statement, you start attracting the right people, people that match. And once you have people that have the same ideas that you have and the same behavior, so to say, then you can really have an aligned team. And then you need a vision, of course. You need to show the people where to go, and you go together.
Do you have some examples of what your mission, vision, and also the values were and how you actually arrived at them, how you created them?
So I always thought that creating values, so every company has values by definition, right? Normally, if it's a small company, it's the values of the founders.
Yeah.
And they might be implicit, right? You may not have a values sheet where it says, this is our values. Yeah. So the art is to kind of make them obvious and so we had a team of a couple people from all the organization. And we worked about, I think, 3 to 4 months on these values. And we really tried to narrow them down and say, what really are the core values that we have? And once you have them, everything becomes easy.
It's like a guiding North Star, right?
Absolutely, right? Every interview you can start and say, look, these are our values. Tell me about them, right? Do you have any connection to that?
Yeah.
So maybe one funny example is one of our values was being on time. Because for us as a business model, it was super important that everybody was on time.
Of course, yeah.
And me, myself, I was not too much a person being on time all the time, right? So I really had to push myself to be on time. Because if the boss doesn't follow the values,
of course,
the whole thing goes down the toilet, right?
Yeah.
So once a month we had these meetings called all-brain meetings. We would have in our Zurich location, we would have about 40 to 50 people, the internal staff, and I gave them updates, and we had questions, and we would just have a people's meeting. And it started at 11 o'clock. And it used to be that people would come in and so on. And once we had the values at 11 o'clock, I had the doors of the meeting room locked from the inside. So half of the company was standing outside. We're like, what the heck is going on? The door is locked. And they were standing outside. And the meeting was held. And afterwards, people came out and said, well, you were too late. No. So the next month, everybody was on time.
Of course.
But you have to do it that way. You have to show the people these values are for real.
Yep.
Right? Because I see I had a long time ago, a discussion with an operations manager of a big Swiss bank. And that was right at the time when I had a values workshop with juniors. And he said, values, super interesting. So what do you think the values of my companies are? And I said, it's very easy. Your values is money. Wait a second. No, it's not. As long as the headlines that we can read in the news are about the bosses getting X amount of bonuses, value is money. And
Absolutely.
With that fact, everybody, if even these days, if you speak to people who work in banks, it's a lot about money, right? And that is the value. And this can be good or bad, right? You can say we need to be focused on the money, but it's pretty much the money that the people make for themselves. And that is it's a company. It has crept in as a company value.
Now, the interesting part is what happens if somebody does not hold up the value? Because as you showed with the meeting room locking example, it's crucial. You have to be super strict, right? Otherwise, the values are not even worth the paper they are written on. So what do you do when an individual does not follow the values? In your case, when they are not on time the first time, but then maybe also the second and the third time, what happens then?
Well, there's an interesting diagram you can make, right? You can performance and value, right? So you have people who are low performance but adhere to the values. Those people you can coach.
Yeah, you can bring the performance up.
Exactly, they can get up. The worst people are the people who have a great performance but don't care about the values.
Yeah, it's very dangerous.
And to be honest, these people you have to fire.
Yeah.
And you have to fire them on your terms.
Yeah.
Because if you don't, eventually they collect a group of the company who thinks, oh my God, I don't need to listen to the values. I join this guy.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you have an alpha and an omega team, right? And they think completely different where the journey should go.
Yeah.
Or the person just leaves when they want. And then they leave you normally. And I've seen this in coachings. They leave you in a moment when it's really bad for the company. Yeah. And then they're gone. And that's really not what you want to do. So you really have to be, and it can be painful because sometimes that person's performance is great, but you cannot tolerate it.
Fully agree. These are the difficult decisions.
That's the very difficult ones, yeah.
Yeah, because people sometimes don't understand in the short term. They think, why are we firing this great salesperson that brought in half of our revenue? But in the long run, it's the only right way to do because the values are not a fit.
Yeah, especially with the sales guys.
Yeah. Typical example.
Exactly.
But how fast do you fire someone if they don't hold up the values? Because there's probably a time frame, right, where you hire them and they think there's a good value fit. How often or how does that process look like when you sort of start to noticing it's probably not the best value fit, although we thought originally that it is a good one?
So what we did at Tempobrain, we had quarterly reviews and we would just check people's behavior towards their value. So I would say first quarter, you give them a warning and say, listen, this behavior is not really fitting. You make it clear that you don't tolerate it. And then I think the second time, it's already pretty much a red flag and probably then they're gone.
Yeah. So a bit of time, but not too much time.
No, because it infects the whole organization.
Right. Yeah.
Right. If some person really can come in late while everybody else is on time, that spreads.
Right.
Yeah.
You've also spent quite some time in the United States. So I wonder, what can American companies teach us about company culture? Because, we always see them a bit as like, oh, that's the big brother. We can learn a lot from the big brother there.
Well, I spent some time at so I was member of an organization called EO, Entrepreneurial Organization, and also YPO, the Young Presidents Organization. And they're pretty much US driven. And therefore I spent some time at the MIT Endicott House, where we had a 3-year, so it was a training, 3 years, 1 week in May each year. And that's where the first time I got really confronted with the whole value concept. And American companies at that time, so to say 20 years ago, the Googles and Facebooks and Starbucks, they were still small, right? They were still the growing companies. And I always looked up to them and I thought they have such a strong value-driven business model. And when you look at Starbucks, I mean, it's compared to any other coffee shop. You can see, you go to a Starbucks, the behavior of the people is rather the same, right? And that is driven by the values and by this relentless continuation of this is how we do it, this is how we treat our customers. And it's really the maximum of how they do it.
So it's a good example to look at US companies on how they built the culture to also take these lessons and embed them in our Swiss companies.
Yeah, I think they have these cult-like cultures, so to say, right? It's really a cult. And once you have values and you hire the right people, you get very like-minded people. And then you end up with a cult, so to say. But it can also go the wrong way. If you think of Google, once they removed their don't do evil value or statement, the people were walking out, people were quitting the company, right? It was a betrayal on the foundation of the company.
Right. Yeah. It's a very strong personal identification. And I think that's a very good thing if things work out, right? If you're aligned there, because then you have very loyal people and they probably do the best work possible then. Yeah. But good example, it can also go the other way around.
It can, yeah. And I think that is especially for founders a very important part, right? You cannot just have values and say, this is amazing. If my team behaves like this, there's no stress. No, you have to be really committing yourself to these values.
No.
And if you don't follow the values anymore, then it's not going to work anymore.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? It really starts with the top level and also the commitment of the top level to really adhere to the values.
You have to lead by example.
Yeah, really. Exactly. And it sounds very, very, very easy, right? Lead by example. Yeah, but it's really in every decision that you make, you should be able to reflect the company values. Yeah. And if you make decisions that are shortcuts or so, and people find out, they're like, that was not according to the values. And then it becomes a joke, right?
Of course, yeah.
And then you lost the trust.
Yeah. And I like that because it's a lot of discipline, also, about consistency. That's the word I'm looking for. And there a quote comes to mind. I wonder if you also heard that. It's from Naval Ravikant, the founder of AngelList. And he said, hard choices, easy life, easy choices, hard life. And I think that very much applies here. It's hard to hold up the values all the time as a founder, but in the long run, this will make it so much easier.
Yeah.
And if you said you take a shortcut, you don't hold up the values, you try to cut them or to get a bit sneaky, it will bite you in the long run, for sure.
Absolutely. Right? And the long run might be even quicker than you think.
Yeah.
Right?
Fair point.
It's really this, every decision that you make on a board or somewhere, you really have to reflect on the values and say, okay, we do this. Is this really fitting? Is this really, I just see your values back there. So it's really, is this matching the values, right? Or is it something that somebody could say, no, they betrayed the value.
Exactly. And culture is also always about people, obviously, because you have a team. That's then the culture eventually. But hiring can be quite a challenge, especially for startups, because for many reasons, it's difficult to find talent. You cannot pay the same salaries, etc. So I wonder, how did you go about hiring really an A team, a top team?
Mm-hmm. So I think there is no A team, so to say, right? There is always the best selection of people that you have with your constraints of time and budget. Mm-hmm. Right? You cannot get the great, huge company CEO in at the very early level,
right? Or
the great CFO, for example, which is probably even the better example, because the CFOs are a very tricky species, right? You need somebody who is able to run the company and keep a good log, but not be bored, right? So if you get a high-level CFO in too early, he sits around, right? So he's not even going to come.
Yeah.
So therefore, I think you always have a certain level, and for that level, you have the best team you can get. Mm-hmm. And eventually, if the company grows, that team might not be the best team anymore. Then sometimes people leave, sometimes people realize they're in over their head. I had this situation with my CFO. Mm-hmm. She was doing great until I think about 15 million revenue. And then the complexity was just too much. And I was very lucky then to find a great CFO who was able to go with me all the way.
I think it sounds very natural when you say that, right? Some people are a great fit for the first phase, others for the scale-up phase, etc. But for people that you work with together for multiple years eventually, it's not always easy to also see it the same way. You know, that's like the company perspective. That's the best for the company. But on an individual level, that can be also very tricky, right? To then say, hey, it's probably time to part ways because we need a different skill set now.
Yeah, I think that is one of the hardest lessons that I've learned. And so I wouldn't say I'm writing a book, but I had an outline of some ideas I would write in a book if I would write a book. And one of them is your employees are not your friends. Mm-hmm. Right? And when I look at young companies, of course, it's very friendly in there and they all, have a great time. But as a founder or a CEO or the owner of the company, they're not your friends, they're your employees. Mm-hmm. You pay their salary. Right. And once you have no money, they're going to come to you and say, hey, where's my salary?
Of course.
Right? So you're the employer and they're the employees. You're on different sides of the table if there's a HR fight or something. Mm-hmm. And with that in mind, it can be brutal to kind of distance yourself on a personal level and say, look, we have had a great ride now. Mm-hmm. But I see that you've been overwhelmed lately with the topics we have. I need a better precision of the numbers, and they don't come. So
yeah, I mean, that's part of the journey, I guess. But that's a good reminder because especially in early stage startups, I feel like it feels more like you're hanging out with friends and you build a product than having your employees there. Especially if you have like a founding team or maybe the first 5 to 10 people, it's much more like a friendship than actually the employee and company or boss relationship. And
friendship must be there, right? If there's no friendship, it doesn't work. If you don't like the other person on a personal level, then it's never going to fly. Yeah. But also with founders, I mean, I've TempoBrain had multiple co-founders, and we parted way over the time, right? And in the beginning, you spend so much time with the other founders that it almost becomes family.
Of course.
But then staying together over the long run, that is not always easy.
This also brings me to a topic that we might also touch upon a bit later, but I want to bring it up here because I feel it's a good fit. It's about balance. So if you have everything in your company, you feel like your friends are there, your work is there, you sort of become the company to a certain degree, right? That's all you breathe the whole day, and then you probably sleep a bit, and that's it. Is that a very dangerous setup? So, by what you're saying now is your employees should not be your friends per se. Of course, some friendship, but not like your friends' friends. So from that, I take away important to have friends outside of your business to have a good balance and not have just one risky bet, which is your company.
Yeah, I think that's one of the fundamental problems, so to say, because you need to spend a lot of time on your company, thinking about it all the time. You spend a lot of time in the company, talking to your co-founders, but having all attention on the company, defining yourself as the company can be very, very dangerous. Because when you sell the company, for example, when you sell a company, you completely lost your ego, so to say, right?
Of course.
And really, I see many entrepreneurs after they sold the company, they're kind of depressed, and I was too, because you lost part of you, and you know also that this part is gone now. It's never going to come back.
Yeah.
And it's not easy, because it's really, if you have, if you're only going out with other people, it's not going to work either. You need that focus on that one topic. I mean, there's a great podcast from Scott Galloway with Brian Chesky, the Airbnb CEO or founder. And he pretty much is now in his 40s, and he talks about what the next step for Airbnb should be. But then towards the end of the interview, Scott talks about, well, who are you as a person, right? And he literally admits that he's been working all the time.
Of course.
And meeting his friends is a list of people he hasn't seen for a long time. So the downside of entrepreneurship, with all the success you can have, the downsides can be significant.
Do you think it's even possible to build a successful company as you did, while still having a balanced life and feeling like, hey, I have time for family, I have time for friends, and maybe also time for myself to go for a walk or do my sports? Is that even possible?
I think it's hard. I think it's very hard. You can try to force it, but your mind wants to work on that topic, right? You don't want to do something else now. Yeah. I mean, if you do sports, I think that is always a good way to get your focus off. But other than that, I think it's tough. And I mean, I had my first marriage failed, and that was partly because I was 24/7 in the company, right? And then you don't have much energy left to deal with problems at home.
Right.
And let's say it's great when the company goes well, and it's amazing, but if the company doesn't go well, those problems you bring at home too.
100%.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a difficult topic. There's probably no real right answer to that. It is a big challenge for many entrepreneurs, I guess, out there. If you think about your journey, you look back, what will be 3 things that you have learned the hard way and you would do differently today?
Well, I definitely think that first topic we talked about is one of them. Don't define yourself completely over your company, because when it's going well, it's amazing, and you might think it's your fault, right? You might think you're an amazing guy, right? And if it goes bad, you feel it's your fault too, and it may not be. The markets may be going up, and your company goes up anyway. Markets might be collapsing, and your company goes down, and had not much to do with you. There was a study that I read a long time ago that said it's less than 50% that the CEO can influence the success of a company.
Which is crazy if you think about it, right?
But in a way it makes sense, right? Because so we had the situation when the euro collapsed to the Swiss francs, right? There was the pegging, and then the euro value went down to the Swiss francs. And suddenly services that were first were very expensive in Germany to buy suddenly became much cheaper. So I lost multiple of my clients in Switzerland because they said, no, wait a second, this stuff just becomes much cheaper. So we outsource all our call centers to Germany. Right. And it wasn't my fault. Of course, it was my fault that I didn't see that coming, but I didn't have it on my risk map. And sometimes that can happen.
What helps you with that? I sometimes try to think about it when I work in a company. I try to give my best, and that's all I can influence. So I can detach that a bit and say, hey, I'm in peace with myself because I gave everything I had, my best job, basically. Yeah. And that's all I can do. Yeah. Is that a good perspective or a good assessment to say, to not become the company, define myself as a person, as the company? Absolutely. I think if you in the end can say, look, I did what I could, and certain things are out of your reach, then I think you're at peace with yourself, right? And that is the one thing you need to kind of digest these things. You have 2 points more that you can share with us about the key lessons learned that you would do differently today. Yeah. So I think one of them is definitely
if you have a company, and we talked about this, right? You focus on this, and this is your one thought when you wake up in the morning. But I think if you don't put all your eggs in one basket, a bit of a hedging, that's a smart way. So, for example, I think I should have started earlier with investing small tickets in startups, just to have a bit of a second stand, and maybe be also able to share my experience at that time with other founders. It just gives you more independence if things don't go well in your company.
Yeah, if you have a single point of failure, the pressure can be immense, right?
Yeah, it is immense. I mean, it's if you bet everything on one thing, it's risky.
No.
The outcome can be amazing.
Of
you have a balanced portfolio, you don't make 10x normally, right?
Yeah.
But it can also go to zero.
Yeah.
Right.
Is that setup something that you would also recommend if you're building your own company, to say, hey, I invest my time and probably also some money in building my own company, but with some other smaller funds, I diversify a bit to other startups or ETFs,
I think so.
Whatever.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you call it the firewall, right? So getting some money behind the firewall.
Yeah.
And it's important that you have a certain amount of money that you can manage independently of the risk that you take in a company, right? Yeah. That you not take another big risk. Especially because if the company goes bad, you might have to pay back some money in, right?
Sure.
So you need some liquidity for that too.
Absolutely. I think that's a very valuable advice from a serial entrepreneur like you, to remind ourselves, hey, hedge your risks.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
A certain degree.
Absolutely, because you don't want to stand in a situation where your company doesn't do well and you have no cash in your account. You might have to, more than once I got no salary for a while in my company. Once I had 6 months no salary. And if you need reserves for that, otherwise you're not in good shape.
Yeah. And what's the third lesson learned?
Well, I think when I look back, there were some moments where I should have listened more to the people around me. Right? Because you said before, if you're successful, you think, I'm such a hero, it's amazing, I'm just great, And sometimes people tell you stuff. I remember one story pretty vividly that one guy came to me from my closest circle and said, listen, this one guy, and I thought it was one of my upcoming stars in my company. And he said, I'm not so sure about that. And people behave differently towards the CEO versus to everybody else.
Of course. Yeah.
So people may say things that you like and of course also deliver results that you like, but behave terribly in the rest of the company. And you may not always get that in that moment, because you say, but look, he is great, right? It's also kind of a value case, right? Exactly. The person is not in line with the values towards other people. And if other people come to you and say that, then you should listen to them.
I like that.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget that, because as a CEO or also as a founder, you're probably often in your own bubble without even noticing it too much, right?
Absolutely. I mean, you're always in your bubble, right? Because you're either in the future or in the past. And normally you're in the future, right? Because you're 3 months, 6 months out, you're wondering what's going to happen there, what can you do today to avoid problems that are coming in. No. But you're not much in the present. So you don't spend much time really, really being present, to say, right? And also when a company grows, you have certain layers that you always have between you and the truth, right? So something happens, being it with an employee, being it with the client, and you only have the hearsay. Maybe from the person at the meeting, or even 2 persons removed. So you're never really getting the actual data, right? So you always have to rely on what does this person say, how does he normally say things, what does that mean for that stuff? It's always an interpretation question.
And even more so, the importance of culture, right? Because you want to have a culture where people can bring you the honest truth, how they see it, and not be afraid of how you would react or anything of that sort.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that was probably another moment I should have listened more to my people. And it was a bit about disruption within, right? So we were in the HR business. We had a great HR system, and we probably should have taken more and do more with that HR system. Right, so we had an amazing database with people, and we used a very sophisticated internal database for our people. And my IT guy came to me and said, listen, how about we open it up for the public? So we make like a jobs.ch competitor.
Right.
And I said, no, that doesn't make any sense, because if you get a person from that website, you pay maybe 50 Swiss francs, 100 Swiss francs. If we are able to lease a person out and have them work on a team, we make a margin of 2,000 Swiss francs per month.
Right.
But that disruption within would have probably helped the company in its tougher times, because there was a second business model kind of on the rise already. Mm-hmm. But that's a very tough moment, right? Because it's the same thing now with Google, right? Should Google now go full AI and throw away its Google search? Google search is so profitable, they don't want to do other stuff.
Of course.
That's why Microsoft is catching up.
Well, I guess that's also the natural cycle, right? You go up, you have something that works very well, you keep hanging on to this until it eventually doesn't work or there's something better. So I guess
Absolutely.
like no company survives forever.
Yeah, and it's a tough, this internal renewal is a very complicated task, because you have a lot to lose.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're a startup, you have nothing to lose. You can go full on.
Yep.
Once you have a certain size, you have a responsibility and all of these things, and you're not that risk taker anymore.
And we know psychologically, right? We are way more in pain when we lose something we already have compared to not winning what we could have won.
Absolutely.
And that's just in our nature to a certain degree. Yeah.
And it can be to our detriment.
Exactly. So nowadays, Frank, you're active in several private equity firms and also as a board member in a number of companies. So I wonder, why was then becoming an investor the right next career step for you after building successful companies yourself, being very operational? Why was becoming an investor the logical next step?
Well, I think from my heart, I'm definitely a founder, right? But I think when you have a wife, kids, a dog, a house, cars, eventually being a founder is not compatible with that. Right? Because either you cannot really give full speed in neither situation, right?
No.
And therefore, as an investor, you get a bit of both, right? You can get the thrill of a company, especially when I coach CEOs. I get that feeling of how their energy is and how they're excited and they're conquering the world, which is great. On the other hand side, you don't have the daily grind they have, right? Because it is a stressful job. It is there's a lot of shit piling up left and right that you have to deal with. And as an investor, you come in, you maybe share your experiences, you might be able to give them a lead, might be able to solve a problem for them, but then you can also take a step back again.
Which job is more rewarding, the founder or the investor one? In terms of personal reward, not financially, but really personal happiness, satisfaction.
I think the founder.
Yeah.
Because the founder is the doer.
Exactly. You build stuff, right?
It's the magic, right? You really have a first-hand experience of your idea creates something. And as an investor, you just, helping that idea to grow, but you're not really on the front line.
And which one is better for the work-life balance?
There's actually a famous private equity quote saying, private equity is hours of boredom punctuated by moments of stark panic. And I think that brings it to a very nice point, right? As an entrepreneur, you're always on the front line. You see where things are going, if things are turning bad or turning good. As an investor in private markets, you don't hear much from your investments. And suddenly you get an update email that says, it's great, we are close to an exit, amazing. Or you get an email like, we will have serious problems and in lawsuits or whatever. So the stark panic is funny because you feel okay with your portfolio until you get the update. So
it's always a bit of a delay in there.
It's a delay, yeah. But then it's a very compact message, right? It's all the news of a month in one email.
Exactly. Is that for you as an investor? Is that, okay to handle? Or is that something that you wish, I wish I was back at the front line and would be update on a daily basis because I really feel the market and the customers?
Well, I like to sometimes talk to the CEOs of these companies I invested in and just get a feeling from them, right? And just have an idea of how their mood is. Are they completely freaked out, or are they reasonable? Are they in good comfort? That's what I try to do.
Yeah. I wonder, this is just a random question, but from an investor's perspective, when you invest in companies, in startups, is there any certain number that is like the maximum amount of investments in companies that you should make? Not cash-wise, but really the sheer amount of pure investments, like how many companies you should invest at the same time?
Well, I would say at the moment I have about maybe a dozen of investments, right? And I think that's the upper limit.
Okay.
Sometimes I invest on my own, so to say. Sometimes it's more like a club deal. And there you have other people looking at the data too.
Right.
I also invest through funds. So for example, with Venture Capital, we have the AXF Alpha, which is a fund where you then still can choose actively your investments.
Okay.
So it's a very interesting model there. You say, okay, I'm going to become LP of the AXF Alpha. But then you don't just give your money and they do whatever they want, but they have certain rounds open at the moment. And you say, I'd like to invest here, I'd like to invest there.
Nice.
Downside is, of course, once you have a new round, AXF Alpha needs to raise money again. Yeah. But it gives you a much better idea of how to allocate your money. And there, I would say you're quite in good hands because you can talk to the CEO of the company, for example, and also to the fund managers, and you get good updates.
Perfect. And what topics or industries are you excited about for the future to invest?
Well, I think at the moment, what happens with AI is definitely something you have to watch. Right? It might be a bit of a hype at the moment, but AI and machine learning are very interesting areas to be invested in right now. So, for example, one company I've coached the CEO and I'm also an investor in, it's called Unmanned Life. So they do autonomous drones or autonomous robots, everything autonomous as orchestrated, right? So you have different types of autonomous machines that work together. And these combinations are very powerful, I think.
Yeah. And besides your professional life, what excites you about the future on a personal level?
On one hand, first of all, I'm married to a wonderful wife. And in our household, we have 4 kids. So I have a 15-year-old daughter from my first marriage. My wife brought a 16 and 17-year-old son. And together with her, I have a 2-year-old baby. And I'm really just excited to see them grow up, help them find their way into society, help them find the way into the world. So my daughter, for example, lives in Chicago. She's 15 now, and she's now allowed to drive a car with an adult at the moment, but that is already very scary. Right? You see these little people grow up and become adults, and being with them on their way is very exciting.
You will certainly not be bored.
Absolutely. No, I'm sure about that.
Absolutely. And then you also have some news regarding the ETH involvement, right?
Yes, that's big news for me. It's like closing a circle. So 30 years ago, I started studying at ETH. 25 years ago, I founded ETH Juniors. And now I'm going back to ETH to become head of entrepreneurship at ETH Zurich. And I think it's a great opportunity to shape the future generations of leaders and of entrepreneurs. So I'm very excited to do that. And it's a great moment as well, because I think it's really time for me to give back. Because I've been profiting a lot from my ETH knowledge and from the ETH Juniors network, and I think it's great to be there for them, and let's see where that will go.
I think after talking to you and hearing more about your story, there's probably no better person than you to fill that position. You have a lot of lessons learned and really practical knowledge to share about how to build a company with all the ups and downs. I think that's going to be super valuable.
Thank you. I always say, also for people, why they should hire me as a coach. I said, I made so many mistakes. It's so, I can, whenever you have a situation, I can probably come up with an example where I did something wrong. Of course, I did also some things right, but over the time, it's important you make more things right than wrong, but you make mistakes as an entrepreneur and you learn from them, and you hear other people making mistakes, you learn from them too. And that gives you a good skill set to guide people. And in the end, they have to do their own mistakes and their own way.
Of course. But it can fast track the learning if you talk to people who've done it before.
Absolutely, yeah.
So to wrap up the conversation, we also have some rapid fire questions for you. I either give you a short question or different options to choose from, and you have to answer ideally in one sentence, but we are a bit flexible today. So let's get started. Which company taught you the hardest lesson?
That was Tempo Brain.
In what way?
The hardest lesson was so now it's not a quick answer. But I didn't sell the company after 10 years, and I had an offer from a private equity firm, and they wanted to buy the company. And between signing and closing, the deal fell apart because we had a sales team in Geneva, and that sales team was working for Swisscom. And between between these 4 weeks between signing and closing, the unions in Geneva decided to have a manifestation against Swisscom in front of the Swisscom store in Geneva, because they said we didn't pay the Swisscom salaries because we paid a lower base salary but much higher upside because we wanted the people to sell. Mm-hmm. And these news unfortunately made it into the Tagesschau, into the daily news. Yeah. And the private equity investor said, "Oh, I just lost my funding, gotta go." And the deal fell apart.
Holy moly. That's crazy. And really, like you said before, that's completely outside of your control. You know,
and it was, when you think about this, 10 years are 520 weeks. Mm-hmm. And it's 4 weeks. So that's less than 1% chance that these 4 weeks out of 520 is exactly that. It could have happened earlier. Of course. We could have reacted to that. But it was right before signing and closing.
Talking about bad timing.
Exactly. Wow. And the irony is we were able with Swisscom to smooth it out, to adapt the salary model. Yeah. And the project was more profitable afterwards than before. But the private equity guys were gone.
Well, they missed their opportunity, so to speak.
They did, yes. Right. They did.
How often do you regret your decisions?
Not much anymore, right? Because at the moment I'm married to a wonderful woman, I have a wonderful family, and if things hadn't gone the way they did, I would not be in this position where I am right now. Mm-hmm. But at the moment, it was definitely something I was a bit annoyed with.
Right. We already talked about that a bit, but still, founder or investor?
As I say, when the circumstances allow it, always founder. Yeah.
What can make or break a team?
Ego. I have also a quick example there.
Yeah, sure, please.
So for our 10-year anniversary, we had a concert with the Fantastic Four, the Fantastischen Vier. Yeah. We rented the Kaufleuten. We had 600 employees. We had 600 people invited. It was cool. It was crazy. It was a crazy night. But what we always did, that concert was so basically at the birthday of the company. Mm-hmm. And what we would do, because we had every year party at the birthday of the company, we would sing happy birthday to the company. And that evening, I was hanging out with the Fantastischen Vier at the lounge. And my guys called me and said, "Hey, we got to sing now." I was like, "Yeah, I'm going to come. And I didn't go down and sing happy birthday with them. That was because my ego was too big. And I thought, I'm now a cool person. I have to hang out with Smudo and Thomas Day. And I betrayed the company in that moment. And when I look back, I think that was for me a bit the turning point where I myself turned against my corporate values, right? And that was at the peak of the company. We were doing great revenues. We were very profitable. We paid big dividends, and that was the moment I think when my ego got in my way of being humble, right? Of being humble, of being devoted to the company, of going with the company values, and I disappointed people there. And I disappointed myself, looking back. So be careful of ego. Yeah. Ego can be a big enemy.
That's a very powerful story to share. Thank you for doing that. What does money mean to you?
So I think money and liquidity is the blood in the veins of a company. Money is so important. When I went to the office every morning, I looked at our liquidity plan. I looked at the bank account. Was cash in there? Were the bills paid? And I had a CFO in the controlling team. So it's not as I didn't do this, but that was always the first thing I did. Yeah. And for me personally, after doing the race car driving and building and selling the villa, money is for me more something to buy time with your family, to have experiences, to create money, and of course to invest in startups.
I love that because it very resonates personally with me. I think that's a very good way to see money. It buys you freedom to be with the people you love and to support projects you believe in. And that's it.
And it doesn't buy you happiness.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? It's you cannot escape yourself and your own demons with money. Yeah. You have to deal with them in another way.
My psychologist once told me money is basically just an amplifier of whatever has already been there. If you make more money and you were unhappy, you're just going to be still unhappy, maybe even a bit more unhappy. Yeah. And I like that understanding. So it solves your money problems if you have any, but that's it. It's not more, not less than that.
It doesn't solve your inner demons. It doesn't solve your loneliness, your unhappiness. It really doesn't. It's really, And it's gone quickly too. I mean, you can spend a lot of money too for stuff that you really didn't need.
Absolutely.
And I think it's that's why I think in a professional sense, it's really the essence of any business. Mm-hmm. And on a personal sense, I think you need to have it. Yes, it's good to have it, but I think if you're too focused on money, it's not healthy.
Yeah, fully agree. Any last words or shout outs from your side before we wrap up?
Well, I think one shout out I have to make, and it's, so we started the discussion with ETH Juniors. So what I'm most proud of is the legacy of ETH Juniors, right? So ETH Juniors, after you finish them, after you leave ETH Juniors, you become an ETH Senior. And what I'm really happy about is that we had, I would say, some really interesting companies coming out of, they were funded by ETH Seniors. So there were people that met at ETH Juniors and then decided together to found a company. And just to mention a few, Get Your Guide is one of them, Climeworks, Beekeeper, Teralytics, Arclet, Wingman, Yonder. So over 30 companies in total have come out of this ecosystem of ETH Juniors and Seniors. That's really, shout out to them. And very happy that they have learned something at Juniors, or at least met a buddy they were able to found the company with and went their own way.
That's amazing. Frank, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a real pleasure talking to you today and sharing all these lessons from you. Really, really, really good stuff. All the best for the future, and thank you again for coming on the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.